The out-of-the-box Revit electrical equipment families look fine. They work great in your models. We can use them, but we can also improve upon them. Instead of just having a rectangular box, we can add some graphics to the panel, add some clearance lines around them to make them really pop and be useful. If that interests you, stick around, and at the end, I will show you how to turn that clearance line on and off within your model. Stay tuned. So I'm in a sample project that we set up for my electrical distribution video that I just did. We use the out-of-the-box Revit electrical equipment families, which do present enough of a graphic to see what we have. These are panels, these little rectangles, and this squarish rectangle is a transformer. This bigger rectangle is a switchboard, and these work great. Personally, we like a little more pop to our electrical equipment. We like to have some graphics within these panels so that they stand out in a floor plan. And we also like to have some clearance lines around these to help others visualize how much space we actually need in front of electrical equipment. So let's get right into this by jumping into the family editor. And I know that that may be a new scary thing for some people, but this is a great way for a beginner to investigate and learn how to edit families without starting from scratch. But start with a family that's already created, get in there and edit just some graphics. We're not even going to be editing any of the 3D aspects of this. So let's get right into that editor. If you click on this panel here, you'll see it's a lighting appliance panel board. It happens to be a certain voltage, certain amps. It's a family that we're going to edit. And up here under Modify Electrical Equipment, we have Edit Family. So we click on Edit Family, and it puts us into this family editor. If you're new to this, you will see it looks a lot like the actual project, but it has a number of different buttons up top. And this allows us to add extrusions to do the 3D aspects. We can add model lines that show up in the model. We can add electrical connections and conduit connections. We have things called reference lines, reference planes. We can deal with the different work planes. So there's a lot going on here. But what we're going to focus on today is no 3D modeling. We're just going to look at some 2D, two-dimensional things that we can do to practice editing a family. And just to call your attention, what's going on here, this big rectangle is representing a wall or a surface within your model. This is a hosted family, which means that these panel boards stick to the wall. They're hosted by the wall. They're linked to the wall of your project. And so this shows an extrusion to imitate that wall. Our actual panel board is this little guy here. That's our panel board. And as you can see, it's just a cube. It's just a box. These green squarish rectangles, if you click on one, it shows over here, it's a connector. It's actually a conduit surface connector that tells Revit that you can connect conduits to this side. And this is another side. So imagine this panel board face up laying on the floor. So they have you create it this way rather than vertically. But it's laying on its back, face up, so it has these conduit connectors on the sides, the bottom, the top, and the back. This is actually the back surface. The circular connector is the actual electrical power connector, which has the information that we need to logically connect this to our system within our model. This is a 3D view that comes up by default, and over here you can control the views. And sometimes these views are closed off, just open them up, and you can see what's going on. We're in a 3D view. Now, a floor plan reference level, it treats that big extrusion as the floor. Again, this panel is laying on its back on the floor. So this kind of gives us a front view of the panel. So you have to think of it kind of awkwardly. It's not vertical. And then the front view would actually be the bottom of the panel. So that's the first hurdle, is to get over, what am I looking at? Why is this so odd? So get used to that. So what we're going to do first is draw some graphics, some annotative elements that will show up as a symbol when we insert this panel into our model. We like to add some lines on this panel. Now, what we are seeing in the model, when you go back here, what we are actually seeing is the edges of the extrusion itself. There's no symbols or anything. It's just the edges of the extrusion. So what we can do is add some lines. Now, do we need these lines to show up as actual lines painted on the panel in the model? We don't. We just want them to show up in a plan view as a symbol. So we are not going to hit create. We're not going to do model lines. We're actually going to use an annotative line. So annotate. This is similar to when you're doing your views and you're adding text and notes and things like that. Those are annotative elements. They're not model elements. So here we can go symbolic line. So we can take this and we have a couple different choices for symbolic lines. We can have just the generic electrical equipment line, or subcategories are hidden lines and visible lines. We don't need those. So we want electrical equipment line. Use the line tool. And let's say we want to draw one right in the middle. Okay, that's a line. And then let's draw a line in the other middle and the other middle. Now, these are I just guessed on these. We can add some dimensions and make these all equal if we want to get that specific. So I would say for now, let's just try it freehand and see how that looks in the model. Now we can test what we've done in the actual model by just saying, load this into the project and close it. Do we want to save the changes? We're not going to save the changes yet. We're not going to save them to our hard drive yet. They will change in our model only. So don't save it. But yes, overwrite the existing version within our model we are working on. So what it will do is it will show you what it looks like already. So already we've improved the look of that panel board. It will pop and stand out a little more within a floor plan. So that's our first improvement. Now let's go back to the editor, re-edit this, edit family. Let's now add some clearance lines. Well, how do we do that? Again, those are going to be an annotative line that only shows up in a plan view. So let us now go back to that front view, which is actually kind of looking at the bottom of this panel. And we're going to draw some clearance lines. Now, these lines we do want to dimension. We want to have some control of those dimensions in our model. So we can have a default setup for these clearance lines. So for example, maybe 30 inches wide by 3 foot deep. But we want to be able to change that within our model. Sometimes we want to show more clearance in front of it than just the code minimum. And in fact, if we recall, this is a 480 volt panel, so we're going to make a 4 foot clearance line as a default. But we want to set up some dimensions. The way we do that is we need to have some reference planes. They're like reference lines, like construction lines, but they're planes. They extend forever. They're not just a line. So in 3D, we want planes. So what we can do is go up here to the create and go over to reference plane. And we're going to create a reference plane. It's just going to look like a line in this two-dimensional view now. But we want to form a skeleton of our clearance lines. We already have this one reference plane at the face of our panel, which is going to be the start of our clearance. So now we just need a side reference plane, and I'm escaping out of there. And I can go back to create reference plane, or I could just keep drawing. And I like to line these up just for understandable, just to make it a little more visual for me. And the dimensions don't matter right now, up to there. And then I can draw a horizontal. I like to extend a little bit beyond. And then this one here, I can actually extend it if I want. So these 4 reference planes can be my framework for my boundary. I need to put some dimensions on these and add some parameters to those dimensions so I can get to them in my actual model. So up here, clear up top in the quick access is an align dimension, or you can go to annotate dimensions. And here's an aligned dimension between parallel references, which is what we want. So we want to start at the first reference plane that we don't want to move. We want this to be the strong reference plane, which means start here, end at this one, and then click somewhere else. And which means if I change this dimension, which line's going to move to me that dimension? I want this second one that I selected to move. So this becomes the strong reference plane, and that's the weak reference plane. The weak one is the one that moves. This is kind of anchored for us. If I click on this, then I can actually go through and type a dimension, and I can type in 4 feet right now. Just a 4 does it. And you can see that that second reference plane is the one that moves. This one stays where it was, which is how I want it to work. So this is called flexing your model. When you type in or try different values, we'll also flex it once we create a parameter. And let's do that now. We want this dimension to have a name. So click on the dimension, and then up top, label dimension. There's no label on it now, and there's no label created here for that clearance depth. We have all kinds of other parameters for this panel that came out of the box. We want to add our own. So go up here to create parameter. The name of this, I'm going to use the word clearance quite a bit here. So let's call this a clearance depth, because it's depth into the room, depth from the face of the panel board. Clearance depth. We're going to make this a type parameter. And remember, there's type or instance. Well, I'm going to start with type, which means that every panel of this type will have the same clearance depth. If I find later on when I'm using this, or my users are using it, that they want to have a different depth for each instance of the panel, we can come back and edit this and make it an instance variable. For now, I'm going to start with type. That way I only have to change it once and it changes everywhere. It says it's going to be a common length type data, which it already knows because it's a dimension. And it's going to group it in our type parameters, that box that comes up, under dimensions, which makes sense to me. Let's keep it there. So now we have a parameter assigned to that dimension. Now we have a width, and I can move this out of the way. We're going to have a width factor to this as well. So let us do another dimension. I'll use the shortcut up top. A width factor. There. Now, strong and weak won't matter as much here, as you'll see. I can set this to a parameter. Let's call that one clearance width. Type variable, dimension, all good. Clearance width. And we can move that up out of the way. So we have depth and width, which is all we need. Now, if I change this width, which line's going to move? Well, this line's going to move because it's the weak one. Let's try that. Let's change the clearance width. Click on that. Go up here. We can also go up here now under Properties, Family Types, this little blue box. If you click on that, now we can see these new dimensions we added under the Dimension heading. So here we can flex the family or test the family. So let's type width 30 inches. And say OK, see what happens. So this pulled in to 30 inches, but it's not centered in front of this panel. How can I make this centered so that both of these get moved in? Well, the way we do that is with another dimension setting that we set to equalize. So click on that one. Click on this. This ends up being the center of our panel board. Click on there, and then click one more time on that far line. Now we have two dimensions all in a string, and we have this little EQ, and I can't make it bigger, but little EQ, and it's got a little red hash, which means it's not equal. If I click on that, it forces the dimensions to be equal. Now, one thing I'll notice here, and I'm glad this happened to show you an example. Look at the graphics now on my panel. These got shifted. It's a mess. What happened? What did we do? Well, let me show you another thing we need to do to this. Let me undo that equal. This dimension here, which happens to be a built-in reference plane called center left right, we need this to be absolutely solid. What happened is it moved. This became the strong reference. These guys ended up being weak, so they both moved. I want this guy to be as strong as can be. So I'm going to click on that, and what I can do up here is I can pin it. Pin that. That makes that dimension unmovable. So that is going to be the strongest reference plane. So let's now redo our equal. We've already got it drawn, so we can just click on it, and now we can click equal. And now you see that center stayed right where we pinned it. The sides moved in to equalize. We don't have any crazy shift of graphics. So that's an important thing to remember. If you need something to be rigid, not move, do that. I also will typically do it to another dimension. If I go back to the reference level, there's typically one called center front back. I also will pin that. Many families you'll find it's already pinned. In this case, it wasn't. So I'm going to pin that too, because that is an essential reference plane that I don't want to be moving. So back to the front. We have a framework for this clearance line. Now we need to start drawing the line. Well, you saw what we had for choices on Annotate under symbolic line. We had electrical equipment with hidden lines invisible. Now we could use hidden lines, and that works. I've seen that done. It'll be kind of a dashed line. I would like this to pop a little more in my model. I would like it to be a red line. Now I can change hidden line to be red, but I'm going to create a brand new line because maybe I want to use hidden lines elsewhere and I don't want them red. I'm going to create a new line. Now the way we do that is under manage. And like if you go into a model, you would think that you can go to additional settings and you can mess with line styles. Well, you can't mess with line styles in a family editor. They've tricked you. What you have to do is go to object styles. The other thing that's tricky here is it says model objects. And here's some lines. We saw electrical equipment and hidden. We're actually dealing with annotative lines, but those don't show up under annotation objects. Only the reference lines and planes show up. So again, Revit's tricking you a little bit. The lines you want to deal with are model objects, even though they end up being annotative lines. Go figure. But here we go. Let us add a subcategory of lines. So down here, we can put a new subcategory under electrical equipment, and we can call it, again, we're using the word clearance. If I can spell clearance lines, that's in line with what they use for the verbiage here, hidden lines, clearance lines. Okay, now we have clearance lines with a 1, which is fine. Let's go to line color of, I like this red, okay. And then a line pattern, I'm going to use a hidden and a 1/16 of an inch. Seems like a good dimension. Okay. So now we have a red line that we can use in our annotate. It shows up here under symbolic lines, even though it acted like a model line. Now we have clearance lines. So now we can draw our clearance lines. Now you can draw exactly on top of these if you want, but we're going to do something next that aligns all of these to these dimensions. So I'm just going to get close to show you how the align feature works. I'm going to draw it a little larger than it needs to be. So there, I have a rectangle. Now I want to make this clearance line rectangle attached and locked to these dimensions, which again act as a skeleton. So if I flex this skeleton, those lines move with it. And you see we don't dimension to the actual entity, the lines. We dimension to the reference plane. It's an important family editing feature. So what we can do now is we can click on this and we can align this line to our dimensioned reference plane. So go up here to align. You select what you want to align to first, to there, and then what do you want to align there is that. So that second guy moves. Kind of reminds me of strong and weak references. And I'm still in the align, so I can do it again. I can align to this from that. Now, what pops up here is this little padlock. Now, this is important. We want to lock this line to that reference plane so that they move together. So it's kind of like pinning it to it, locking it. And I did not do it here, but I can. But if I just click on it, I don't get a lock. So what I have to do is I have to redo an align command. Even though they're already aligned, redo the line command, then I get a padlock. So if you're not getting a padlock, redo the align command. Align to that, from that, lock it. And one more. We want to go to this one. There it is. Sometimes you can't see it. And sometimes you get confused of which line is which. Lock that. So that looks correct. We've got that on the right lines. Now, if we are to flex the family, by changing the parameters, we can make clearance depth 3 feet now. It popped down to 3 feet. Our red line popped down. So that appears to be working properly, and we can further test it in our model. So let's go ahead and load it in. We're not going to save it yet, but we are going to overwrite it in our test model. There we go. That's our clearance line. Now, let's see if this works in the model. Click on there. Our dimensions that we just added should show up not as an instance parameter because we made them a type parameter. So we have to edit the type parameters, type properties, depth and width, clearance width. Let's make this 30 inches. Apply it. And that did that. and right at the edge of the switchboard, and then let us make it deeper because it's a 480 volt system. So the depth will make 4 feet. Now we have our clearance showing up in our model, so we can keep things clear of this free space. Now, a couple added bonus features I would like to add to this, because this is fine the way it is, but I would like to add a few more things. Thanks for sticking around to watch this far, and if you have gotten some out of this, I'd sure appreciate if you click that like, thumbs up button down below. Also, if you want to see more of this, I've got a lot of this on my channel, please hit the subscribe and you'll keep up to date with all of these Revit electrical videos. I appreciate that very much. So let's move on now to doing a few more edits. Back to Edit Family. I want to make this clearance line toggle on or off. Sometimes I may not want it shown in a project. So how can I add an on-off button to this? Well, what I can do is make sure I'm hovering over the line itself. And if I hit Tab, it will select a chain, you might call it, of lines that are connected together or touching. If I hit Tab, you will see that all of them highlight. So I've got them all highlighted. Now I have to click it to actually select them. Now I've selected all of those. On the right, under Graphics, there's a little thing called Visible. Right now it is visible. I can turn it off and they're gone. But I want to be able to do that within my family. So the way I do that is far on the right. And it's hard to see. There's a little teeny little box right there. Associate Family Parameter. You click on that and I can associate this family parameter to be a parameter in my model. I call it mapping an internal family parameter to the model itself. So there's other family parameters that are already mapped. We're going to create one. Well, this is a search box. That won't help me. I need to actually jump down here to this new parameter. New parameter, and let's use our favorite word, clearance boundary. We're going to be turning on and off the clearance boundary, so that makes sense to me. Again, we're going to make this a type parameter, but right now it's going to show up in the other category. I would like that to be a little more descriptive. Let's make it show up under the graphics. See, there's so many categories we can pick. Let's go to the graphics category. I'll show you how that works. Okay, and then okay. So all we've done now, we've added an on and off button. Let's load the project in. Don't save it, just overwrite it. So now, within my actual model, I can go to Edit Type, and under Graphics, there's my clearance boundary I just added. I can unselect that, and it disappears if for some reason I don't want that to show up. Okay, so now we have the on-off button. So there you have it, a simple beginner's kind of family editing of just editing the graphics of these panels that come with Revit. You can do this also with switchboards and transformers and all kinds of equipment if you want to add clearance lines. I'd suggest get in there and practice and see how it goes. Until next time.